Before we do that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I work at Aristotle Interactive here in Little Rock. I'm a web producer, and I do project management, and lately I like to tell people that I make the web fast, because that's what I love doing. And so I also work for a company out of New York called Thankful, where in my spare time I teach students front-end web development and Angular.js. And that's really been an awesome time. I wish I had that back in high school when I was learning front-end web development. I have somebody to just kind of soundboard things off. So right now I'm writing their curriculum for their intensive Vue course, where I talk about web performance. We go deeper into JavaScript and advanced techniques. So that's a little bit about me. We may pause during the video because the camera for some reason only records 30 minutes at a time. Which is a weird feature to have. That's about me. Let's talk about web performance. So we're going to talk about the perf life, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we've optimized our code in the past, how we have measured performance in the past, new ways that we can optimize our code, what metrics we should be measuring whenever we measure web performance, and also look at what tools are available to us and what technology is coming up in the future that can help us from the client side, from the browser, to measure web performance. Sorry, you guys, while I'm switching slides, don't make I get the best view. So web performance is kind of a playground right now. It's kind of a newer topic. About 2007, a guy named Steve Souders from Google wrote a book called High Performance Websites. And he had these 14 rules, which we'll look at a couple of them later. But that was really kind of the kickoff of this discussion of web performance and getting things to the client and making sure that the pages load really fast. And so the idea is that we want to track performance better. We want to have better code structure so that our performance is optimized. And there's a lot of room for improvement in this area. There's best practices that are changing all the time. And so we just have to be mindful of that as we're talking about best practices. One thing may work for one website, but not work for another. So let's just kind of keep that in the back of our minds. And so thinking about the past and the internet when it was still young, does anybody want to take a stab at what was on web pages back in the day? What was generally on there?
The guy with the shovel. Anyway, the shovel.
Right.
Architects.
Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, so I kind of came up with this idea of what websites looked like back in the day. Obviously, you've got your fire GIF here, that, the flames, everybody, whenever you started to develop, for some reason that was the coolest thing to put that on. But majority of the time you just had some text and some images, and it really wasn't much else. Yeah?
And your page hit counter, you got to show it.
Yeah, page hit counter at the bottom usually. Yeah, absolutely, and usually the background. talk about performance today. What benchmarks are we using today? And like we just talked about, user experience. How fast until the user is seeing that first paint would start render? How fast until the above the fold content is loaded? And how fast until the document is interactive? And it's kind of a dumb moment as to why user experience is important, is because we're developing these websites for the user, right? Like, they're the person and we should be having in mind while we're developing. And so another great importance is SEO. This has recently just come out. Fast sites equal better rankings on Google. This is something that hasn't widely been talked about, but there are some articles from the Google team out there that as your sites do better in performance, the rankings go higher. And the correlation with that, there's been some surveys done, and most of them have found that time to first byte, which is again what we talked about earlier when the user clicks and it gets information back from the server, that's the possible determining factor right now as far as how Google ranks that. In optimizing our code, the biggest thing is to make your website responsive. In previous years, we've had a desktop version of a website, and then we've also had a mobile version of the website. And whenever a user would go to the URL, if it needed to be redirected, it would just redirect to that mobile site. Again, that adds another redirect, which adds more time to the performance. And so rather than doing that, we could have one website that fits for every device and make it responsive. So if you aren't doing responsive web design in your website, stop everything, redo the website, and I'm just kidding. You have to do it in phases. But also above the fold CSS in the head element, and possibly just inlined in the head element. A lot of people are like, well, that's bad practice, putting a style tag in the head element that will make it all clustered up and it'll look bad. But if we get rid of the below the fold CSS, so that's the CSS that's just needed for what the user's not seeing, and we put that at the end of the body element, and we just put the above the fold CSS in the head element, it's, again, CSS is render blocking, so it's getting that to the user faster. It's getting that HTML to the user faster. And also, if you were to take, instead of using an external link to the above the fold CSS, if you just put the CSS in the HTML document, it's not having to make another request, which again takes down the amount of time it takes to load the page. It's kind of a trade-off deal. You really have to look at what the website is, and again, it may not work for every website, but it could work. It's worked before. Then, like I talked about, below the fold CSS, put at the end of the body element, and that's because there's no need for them to see any styling of those elements yet until the document becomes interactive and they can scroll. So there's no need to put those stylings in the head element. Also, using CSS instead of GIFs. CSS has matured a lot lately. You can do translations and 3D objects and all kinds of animations with CSS. And so there's kind of, it can't do everything, but it can do some things. And SVGs are even starting to be animated now, and you can use those as well. Looking at image types, Google released WebP, which is a new image type, and it's 25 to 34 times smaller than the JPEG equivalent, 26 times smaller, or 26% smaller than the PNG equivalent. The only bad thing is it only runs on Chrome and Opera. And you're like, well, what would I use it for then if it's only going to work on 2 different browsers? And that's where we get the help of the picture element. How many of you guys have heard about the picture element? Very nice. Okay, so quite a few. So the picture element, whereas before we used CSS, because talking about responsive images, we wanted one image to load at a certain screen size, and we wanted another image to load at a different screen size. So what we used to do was go into CSS and add our media queries, and we'd say, add this image if it's this size, and this image if it's this size. The problem with that is that it downloads both images. And what we want is for only one image to download, so that we don't have this bloat of images that we're not even going to use in our page. So that's exactly what the picture element does. We can even load different types. Let's just go ahead and take a look at the code here. So it works in ID9 and up, and which is awesome. But you'll see the picture element, you'll see the source and source set. So you've got large.webp at a minimum width of 800 pixels, and then you can set the type of the image to WebP. So if the browser supports WebP, it will use this image. If not, it will fall back to this JPEG here that's at the same media query width of 800 pixels. So let's say then that it's between 400 and 800 pixels. It will go to this medium JPEG image. And then let's say that the picture image, the picture element isn't supported by the browser, or none of these requirements fit the criteria for the image. It'll fall back to this normal image tag so that there's no inconsistencies. The thing is with browser support for the picture element, it's also Chrome and Opera, but there is a polyfill called picture fill, and it's in the links on the resources page that I'll show later. And that JavaScript file, if you add it to your website, it will allow full support of the picture element. The cool part about it is if you're on Chrome or Opera, it won't load that JavaScript in, so it's not adding to your performance any. So that's really awesome. Sprites are another thing that has been used for years, and they've been around for a long time, but they kind of, again, got lost somewhere along the way. And so using sprites for icons and even logos, and then instead of making a bunch of different small requests, we'll put all these images in one big image, download that big image, and then use CSS to only show certain parts of this one image. And so this is really helpful because it gets rid of all those requests. Now your page size may increase just a little bit, but your entire load time will definitely go down using sprites. So this is all well and good, but I love a good case study. I love to see examples. And so one of the things at Aristotle that we, of course, obsess about is performance. Like, we want to make sure that our clients' websites are just incredible. And so we had a client who had called in and said, our website isn't performing well. And we're like, okay, well that's weird. It's performing great. Whenever we launched it, let's take a look and see what happens. So we did an initial test, and it was loading at around average about 25 seconds. And we're like, okay, that is not good. And the speed index, which is how long it takes the above the fold content to load, you can't really see that. That's 10 seconds for the above the fold content to load. We'll talk more about speed index later. So we're like, okay, this is not good. So we started taking a look, and what we found, number one, was that the client was loading multiple 5 megabyte images into their CMS, and then it was loading. So try loading that on a 3G network. And so we were like, okay, step number one is optimizing the photos, and so we did that. And there were some other things that we saw along the way that, as you know, it had been launched, we could do to help things. So we moved all the scripts to the bottom of the body element, created a sprite for all the little icons and the logo, and then we put all the JavaScript files into one file instead of multiple files, and we put all the CSS files into one file instead of multiple files, and then we minified those, we condensed those. And that did a great job. I don't know if you guys can see these numbers, but it ended up taking 7 seconds instead of 25 seconds, and the speed index was 5.2. Now that's obviously not where we want it to be. That was just the first pass. We've got some more stuff that we're going to be doing with this client. Removing CSS bloat, separate above the fold CSS and below the fold CSS, and use WebP image formats for logos. We're testing with some of that stuff and figuring out what works best. But again, clients, if 40% of users will abandon a request if it doesn't load within 3 seconds. And so we've got 3 seconds to make that impression. Let's take another case study. So I like A/B test as well. So we have test A where the JavaScript and CSS is in the head element. We have unminified JavaScript and unminified CSS. And then we also use baseline JPEGs to load the images. Test B, it does all the practices we talked about, above the fold and below the fold CSS, where they should be, and then it uses progressive JPEGs. And so we can take a look and see side by side what's happening. So you'll notice, we'll take a look at it one more time. is loading quite a bit faster than test A. And that's because the HTML, this image and everything else in the HTML is loading a lot faster than test A is. And so on a site this small, this just had some text and some image on it, it shaved off 0.3 seconds. On sites at a large scale, such as a state website or state parks or tourism websites, it could shave off anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds, several seconds depending on what your website is. And so it's kind of scalable in terms of how much it will improve. And so today, what should we be measuring? How do we measure performance in our websites? So we want to look at the back-end load time. So how many redirects are there? So again, redirecting to a mobile site, we want to try to get rid of that so we don't have that redirect. Also 301 redirects. Be really mindful of how you're setting those up so that it's not sending them into a loop of 5 different redirects. The number of requests the page is making, so how many CSS files, how many images, how many JavaScript files. Let's condense those down and make those better. Time to first byte, which we talked about earlier, which correlates with Google's SEO page rankings. We also want to look at the front-end load time, so the start render, the speed index. So we looked at this just a little bit earlier. We talked about how long it takes the above-the-fold content to load. Patrick Meenan, who works at Google on their performance team, created this website that we'll look at here in a minute, and he created Speed Index, and he uses image recognition software to measure how fast it takes everything above the fold to load. So visually complete is also what we want to look at. We want to see it, how long it takes all those visual elements of our page to load fully. Also, we want to do total load time as well, because that's still important today. So how do we measure these things? There's 2 schools of thought on this. Real user measurement. It'll gather data from actual users and devices, so that's when someone goes to your page then takes their performance data and sends it to a server so that you can do whatever you want with it afterwards. This will measure performance from different locations, so you can really get a good idea of where your users are from, how fast it's taking them to load the page. Then synthetic testing is gathering data from actual devices and browsers, but not necessarily actual users. You can, again, load it from different locations. If you have a computer in Egypt, you could have it test your site from Egypt and then get that information. And this allows you to see like a non-cached first view type response to your website. So if this is the first time that a user has seen your site, how's it going to perform for them? So looking at real user measurement tools, navigation timing API is the best thing to use. It's actually what Google Analytics, Boomerang, and Nine's performance tool use to measure your performance. So if you've got Google Analytics enabled to measure performance, this is what it's using. And also paid services use it as well. So you can really do this yourself. Google Analytics is obviously awesome. They do a great job of handling this. They collect all the user measurements for you. The one thing that I caution with Google Analytics is that they measure things by average. And let's say you have an outlying number of 60 seconds as opposed to, it's between 3 to 4 seconds usually, but for some reason it loaded in 60 seconds. It may skew your results just a bit. What is more preferred in performance is to use median. So it takes all of them and then gets the middle number, and that's how you usually test for performance. Boomerang was created by Yahoo back in 2007. Steve Souders was actually working for Yahoo, and he created this tool called Boomerang. It's been great for several years. It's kind of a tried and true tool to use. But they don't really measure user experience. And that's really what we're trying to get to today, is how do we measure user experience. Nine's performance tool is one that I created that helps developers see the actual performance data on the website rather than going to another website to look at their data. We'll take a look at that example here in a minute. So the navigation timing API, We can measure back-end performance by taking when the page unloads, when the previous page unloads, and we can measure the time it takes to do redirects, app cache, DNS, TCP, how long the request to the server took, and the response back. And so that's your back-end time right there. And then here this says processing and onload. And this is how long it takes the DOM, the HTML, and everything to load. And then when does the browser say, okay, I'm done. And that's your front end there. And usually there's an 80-20 rule. And you want your back end to be about 20% of the page load time and your front end to be 80%. And then looking at synthetic testing, it uses real devices. It gives you that first view, uncached version. It'll also, some tools will allow you to do repeat views so you can see how your cache is loading. You can test the website from multiple locations, and then New Relic is somewhat new. It's been out for a few years, and then webpagetest.org is obviously kind of the standard for synthetic testing. Does anybody use New Relic by any chance? What about webpagetest.org? How many of you guys have heard of that? Okay, so just a couple. And then Nine's performance tool kind of piggybacks off of webpagetest.org. So I want to stop and take a look here at, find it. Yeah, so this is webpagetest.org. So you enter in the URL, and then once you enter in the URL, you can choose from the locations, and they've got different countries here you can test from. You can set the number of times you want the test to run. So you can actually get median data from 9 different tests, up to 9 different tests. You can do first view or first view and repeat view. And then you can also capture video, which we'll look at here in a minute. Hopefully, if I have internet.
Hey Matt, can you
Yes.
make it just a little bit bigger when you get a second?
Make it bigger?
Yeah.
Is that how you?
That's fine.
Great. Okay, so looking at that again, you set your test location, see what country, where you want it to test from. You can set what browser as well, so testing in different browsers. And then setting the connection speed. There's 3G network, DSL, cable, all kinds. You can do up to 9 tests, and then you can capture video. And when you do that, zoom out just a little bit. You guys still see that? Great. You'll see that there's a letter grading. So Google got an F in first byte time, which is kind of ironic. But there's keep alive enabled, compression. If you have images, it'll give you a grade of how well you did on compressing your images. And it'll even tell you what images weren't compressed well. How well you're doing caching your content, your static content. And then if you use a CDN, a content delivery network, it gives you a grade for that. I don't believe we'll be able to see it. But this is a waterfall chart, so this takes every script, every CSS file, everything that loads in the page. It gives you a waterfall chart to show you how it's loading and what speed it's loading. And here we can see the fully loaded time there, and then bytes in is how the size of your page. 390 kilobytes is definitely something to shoot for. Of course, Google didn't have anything on its own page. But then we look at the speed index, and again, that's really important. We want to make sure that's around 2 seconds, and we want to make sure that this time fully loaded is around 3 to 4 seconds. And then there's start render and the number of DOM elements that you see in that. And then here you can also see charts to show you how much of the document was HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and how much was images, or just images. There's also, I don't have internet on here, but there's a film strip view. If you look right here, there's a film strip view. And this is huge for user experience and measuring user experience, because what webpagetest.org will do is take a video of your page loading and then show you at different points, and show you different images to show you, okay, this is what's loading at this time, and this time, and this time. And so we can actually see what is loading at what time, so we can see what the user is experiencing. And see, okay, well, it's not, the first render isn't actually rendering until 4 seconds. What can we do to make that better? the A/B test that we were talking about. And I think, let me try to, can you guys see that bottom bar down there? Okay, great. So this is the performance tool created to help kind of measure RUM and synthetic testing. So if you click, or if you look here, it'll say current, and this is how fast the page loaded for you. So you can just see what that looks like. This is page median. So every user that visits that page, their information goes to the database, and then I can take all of that information and get a median page load time. And so it's usually loading in about 1 second here. You can also click on page median and see all the different countries that the page has loaded in. And again, see this first number here, you'll see 3 different numbers. The first number is back end, the second number is front end, and then this is the total load time. So same here, back end, front end, total load time, and see if there's a country that you're getting a lot of users for, but it's taking them somewhere between 50 seconds. This is taking 2 seconds for Belgium. So I could buy a content delivery network close to Belgium, and the Belgium users would get that content faster. So you can kind of, if you've got international traffic, use this to determine what you should do. If you click on resources, it tells you everything that loaded in this page, and it tells you how long it took that asset to load onto the page. And so this helps us pinpoint if there's a problematic image or a problematic script. It'll help us pinpoint and see where the problem is so we can immediately fix it instead of spending a whole lot of time trying to find where the problem is. And then it also uses webpagetest.org. It will give you the first byte time, start render, all those metrics we talked about, and it'll even give you a link that you can click on and go to that web page test URL so you can actually see the waterfall chart and everything else. But my favorite part is the frames here. So you can't really see that right there. But as I scroll through, you'll see the different images that are coming up. Again, we're seeing how the user is experiencing. And so we'll see here at 1.2 seconds, it was 100% loaded, and that's the image. And then if we scroll back just a bit, you can see at 1 second it was 13% loaded, and that's what they were seeing. So again, measuring user experience, this is kind of where we've come to today as far as how we can measure that user experience. And so this is actually free to use. It's on GitHub. It's on that website. I give a whole documentation to tell you how to plug it in, load it. And then it also comes with reporting. And so I've set up these Google graphs that take all that information in your database. You can actually choose what URL you want to see data for. You can choose what country you want to see data for. You can even choose a start and end date. And after you do that, you click submit, it'll pull up these charts here. So you can see the back end was loading at 0.34 seconds. And the total load time was 0.53 seconds. And that's the median load time. And then if you scroll down, this is the webpagetest.org data. So it'll also, I have it set up where you can test it every hour so that it's continually testing your website. And then in the morning, I usually go in, look at this report, and see if there's anything wrong. And if, let's say, all of a sudden on February 10th, we saw this huge spike in load time, well, I would know, okay, something was done on February 9th that happened. Let's go back and figure out who it was and fire them. I'm just kidding. And then page load size, I've tried to figure out what that is. I don't know. It all of a sudden jumped up and went back down that one day. So you can watch your page grow in size, because remember, we want to be mindful of making sure that it stays pretty small for those mobile networks. And also the number of DOM elements, how many elements are in your HTML document. What I really wanted to accomplish with this tool was to be able to not just allow developers to find out what the performance was. I wanted an artist or a project manager, or anyone really, to be able to do something to the website and then go to the website and use this toolbar to see how that change affected their website. Because want to create this culture of performance in mind, rather than just having like performance cops that kind of check it before, or check it after, or maybe checks in a few times during. If you have your team, or even just you, if it's just you working, if you have that constant reminder of, hey, this is above our performance budget, then you get that performance culture going in your team a lot easier. And we've been doing it at Aristotle for a few weeks now, and it's been incredible. I've been tweaking this thing a lot over the past few weeks, but it's gotten to the point it's running great. We're testing some clients' websites, and it's proving to be valuable to the developers and project managers. In the future, and really today, user experience is going to affect SEO even more. Considering the fact that Patrick Minnan from Google created Speed Index, I think we're going to start seeing that Speed Index is going to be one of the determining factors in page rankings. Maybe not in the next couple of years, but definitely after he perfects that whole Speed Index metric, it will be a factor. HTTP 2 and Speedy. Somebody was talking about Speedy earlier. I saw yesterday that they're deprecating that early 2016, and so they said full steam ahead on HTTP 2. And that protocol will just work faster than the 1.1 protocol we've all come to know and love. Prefetch and pre-rendering. This is something that you can actually use in most modern browsers. Even in IE10 and up, I believe. But what it is in the head of your document, you use a link tag, and you tell it, instead of calling a style sheet, you would say prefetch. So let's say that your website SEO shows that the majority of your users go from the home page to this events page. And on the events page, there's a lot of static photos or some more CSS that needs to be loaded. You can actually set up the prefetch link to fetch those images for you while they're still on the home page. And we'll take a look at the video here in a second to kind of clear that up. But then pre-rendering, you can actually get an entire page to load while they're still on the home page. So it can load the entire events page while they're still hanging out on that home page. And it kind of show you, this is a video Google put out that shows how that works. I don't think there's any. They're searching for the same thing, both have the same results. So it took 0 seconds for that next page to load. And how they do that is Google said that if they're really confident that you're going to click on that first result, they'll pre-render that result so that when you click on it, it just immediately comes up. So we can do that for entire pages, or just for certain resources, like certain CSS files or certain JavaScript files. And like I said, prefetch is definitely something that you can use today. It's on modern browsers. It won't mess up other browsers, so if it's not supported, it's not going to mess anything up. Pre-render, I believe, is in Chrome and Opera and Firefox, but not in IE just yet. But maybe in a few months, when the Spartan project comes out, we can all celebrate that. So, measuring performance using microseconds instead of the standard milliseconds. High resolution timing API is supported on majority of the browsers today, and it just gives you a more finite time of how long it took something to load, and that's good when measuring performance and user experience. So the user timing API is something that I just discovered over the last couple of months. It is super cool. I love this API. You can measure AJAX requests. You can measure how long it took the actual request to load, and then how long it took the response to come back to your page, and then how long it took everything of that AJAX request to load. So then you can say, well, this AJAX request is taking a lot of time to load, and optimize it so that it's not taking so long. And then JavaScript beacons send performance data asynchronously whenever the page is unloaded. And these are it's only in Chrome, Firefox, and Opera. But what happens is when the user clicks on a button to go to that next page, as the current page is being unloaded, that beacon will send your performance information to the server, so that it's not hindering the performance of your HTML whenever. Because usually what we have to do is load that script. So everything now, Google Analytics and everything else requires you to load that script in the head or load it at the end of the body. Well, that takes time. So using the beacon, we can not take any of the user's time and send it asynchronously. Navigation error logging is a JavaScript API where you can get real user measurements of when and how a page failed to load. So if it was at the DNS lookup or the connection timeout, or if it was a reset connection, you can see why that's happening, and then also in turn see where that user is located, so that maybe it's a location thing, or maybe it's something that's actually happening to a lot of users. This actually isn't supported yet. It's in W3C's editor draft, but it's come. So, concluding everything, trying to get some takeaways from here. Performance matters. It's time, it's money, it matters. And so we need to optimize the code and images, especially keeping in mind that picture elements and those new image types, and then using above the fold CSS and below the fold CSS, and then use real user measurement and synthetic testing and the tools available, which I can give you the links to all that. Actually, the link is right here for that NIMES performance tool. And using those to actually track the performance over time, because really the best way to figure out how well your page is doing is to let it sit for a few days and then come back a few days later and see those graphs and see what it is that needs to happen to optimize your website. And then embrace the APIs to measure user experience and performance. All those APIs, all those future things we just talked about, those are things in JavaScript that really, it's easy to code. So that's my presentation on web performance, and that's my Twitter. And if you guys want to follow me, I tweet stuff about performance all the time. I'm a nerd over this stuff, so feel free to follow me. And if you guys have any other questions, I'd love to talk to you guys. I don't know how we are on time, but maybe talk afterwards, or if you have questions about your website,